Most people don't fall apart all at once. They hold themselves together quietly. They wake up early, they go to work, they smile when they're supposed to, and they keep telling themselves, as long as my child is okay, I'll manage. I believed that too. I thought I was doing a good job pretending everything was fine until my daughter asked me one simple question that stopped me cold. Before we go any further, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this video from right now? A big city? A small town? Maybe just your bedroom late at night? Tell me in the comments. And if stories about real life, real pressure, and quiet strength speak to you, like this video and subscribe to Grandma Stories Studio. Now stay with me, because this story might feel uncomfortably familiar. I've lived long enough to notice something most people don't talk about. The hardest seasons of life don't look dramatic. They don't come with loud arguments or obvious breakdowns. They come quietly, and they settle in. They sit with you at the kitchen table while you sort through bills. They follow you to work and back home again. They whisper to you late at night when the house is finally still. This story isn't about bad decisions or careless parenting. It's about someone trying their best and carrying more than they should have to carry alone. As I tell this story, I want you to stay part of it. If something feels familiar, let me know in the comments. If you've ever said, "I'm fine," when you weren't, tap the like button. It helps this story reach the right people. And one more thing before we begin. Tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. All right, let me take you back to where it all began. From the outside, this family looked just like any other on the street. The house wasn't big, but it was clean. The lawn was trimmed when there was time. The lights came on every evening right around dinner, steady and familiar. Nothing about it suggested trouble. Nothing about it hinted at struggle. The parent had learned how to move through each day without drawing attention. The alarm rang before sunrise. Coffee was poured quietly, careful not to wake anyone else. Shoes were tied slowly, already worn thin at the edges from too many long days. There were 2 jobs most weeks, sometimes 3 when weekends could be sacrificed. Not because of ambition or dreams of more, but because responsibility doesn't wait until you're rested. It simply shows up and expects to be handled. Every evening followed the same pattern. The front door opened, the tiredness stayed outside, the smile came in. "Hey," the parent would say, voice steady, "how is school today?" Dinner was simple and carefully planned. Pasta, rice, soup, meals that could stretch just a little further than expected. The daughter sat at the table, swinging her legs, talking about spelling tests, friends who changed moods too quickly, teachers who assigned too much homework. The parent listened closely, nodding, laughing at the right moments. No matter how heavy the day had been, that voice mattered more than anything else. Bills were tucked away in a drawer, late notices were folded neatly out of sight. Worry was saved for late nights when the house was quiet and no one could hear the sighs. And let me pause here and ask you, have you ever worked so hard to make life feel normal for someone else that you forgot how heavy it felt for you? If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. Let me know you're here. The parent believed something many good parents believe. If the child doesn't see the struggle, she'll feel safe. What they didn't realize yet was that children often sense the truth long before adults admit it. Stress doesn't announce itself when it arrives. It doesn't knock on the door or make noise. It settles in quietly, like a shadow that grows longer each day until you suddenly realize how much space it's taken up. The parent stopped counting weeks and started counting hours. How many hours until the next paycheck? How many shifts could be added without the body giving out? How little sleep could still count as enough? Groceries cost more than they used to. Rent never waited. Utility bills arrived right on time every time, demanding attention whether there was money for them or not. Some nights, after the daughter had gone to bed, the parent sat alone at the kitchen table, papers spread out carefully, numbers written and rewritten as if rearranging them might make them kinder. The lights stayed off in other rooms to save electricity, and the silence felt louder than any noise. And still, every morning, the routine repeated. The smile, the calm voice, the reassurance that everything was fine, because parents don't get days off from worry. The daughter noticed changes even when nothing was said. Dinner came later than it used to. The television stayed off more often. The house felt quieter, heavier somehow. Hugs lingered just a second longer, as if the parent needed them more than before. Children don't need explanations to sense when something is wrong. They hear it in sighs. They see it in eyes that don't quite rest. They feel it in the way adults pause before answering simple questions. Still, the daughter didn't ask, and the parent took that silence as proof that everything was working. Let me ask you something here. Have you ever stayed quiet about your worries because you thought it would protect someone you love? If yes, tap like. Someone else listening needs to know they're not the only one. That night, after another long shift, the parent sat on the edge of the couch, shoes still on, too tired to move. That's when the weight finally settled, not on the shoulders, but deep in the chest. The moment didn't arrive during an argument. It didn't come with raised voices, slammed doors, or tears spilling over the edge of exhaustion. It came quietly, wrapped in an ordinary evening. The daughter sat at the kitchen table with her homework spread out in front of her. The pencil tapped softly against the paper, a steady little sound filling the room. The parent stood nearby, wiping down a counter that was already clean, pretending there was still energy left to give. The house felt calm, too calm. Then the daughter looked up, not suddenly, not nervously, just thoughtfully, the way children do when they've been thinking longer than adults realize. And she asked, "Are we okay?" 3 simple words, no drama, no fear in her voice, but the question landed heavy, because it wasn't about homework, it wasn't about dinner, it wasn't even about money, it was about safety. The parent's first instinct was to answer quickly, to smile and say, "Of course we are," and keep everything moving forward. That's what adults do when they think protecting means hiding. But this time, the words didn't come. The parent just stood there, silent. And in that silence, something important happened. The daughter watched closely, not with panic, not with tears, just with patience. She wasn't demanding reassurance. She was searching for honesty. That's when the parent understood something painful. This child wasn't asking because she didn't know. She was asking because she already felt it. Let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever been asked a simple question that hit deeper than you expected? If yes, leave a heart in the comments. You're not the only one. The parent slowly pulled out a chair and sat down. Hands rested flat on the table. The tiredness in their face was suddenly impossible to hide. In that moment, pretending felt heavier than telling the truth. And the parent realized this question wasn't going away. The chair scraped softly across the floor as the parent sat down, not because they wanted to, but because their legs no longer felt steady enough to stand. They looked at their daughter and, for the first time, really saw her. Not just the child who needed care or guidance, but the little human who had been noticing everything all along. "I've been tired," the parent said, their voice low but steady. "I've been working hard. And sometimes I worry." No numbers, no spreadsheets, no mention of bills or deadlines, just the truth. The daughter nodded slowly. She didn't look shocked. She didn't cry. She simply listened, the way children do when they're older than their age and wiser than they seem. Then she said something that caught the parent completely off guard. "I worry too." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a complaint. It was a small, honest admission spoken with quiet confidence. That's when the room changed. The heaviness that had been sitting on the parents' shoulders for weeks didn't disappear, but it shifted. It was lighter because it was shared. The daughter spoke about little things she had noticed over the past weeks, the way footsteps paced in the dark, the way the parents stared at the bills late at night, the way hugs suddenly felt longer, tighter, more urgent. She didn't judge. She simply observed. And that's when the parent realized the mistake they had been making for so long. Protecting someone doesn't always mean hiding everything from them. Sometimes it means letting them in, sharing the weight, letting them feel trusted enough to understand. The parent reached across the table and held the daughter's hand. It was a simple gesture, but in that quiet moment, it meant more than any words could. "We're okay," the parent said, not as a lie, but as a promise. "We're figuring it out together." And viewers, here's something I want you to remember. Strength isn't pretending everything is fine. Strength is showing up even when life is heavy and being honest about it with the people you love. That night, the parent finally felt the first sense of relief in weeks, not because the problems had disappeared, but because the burden wasn't theirs alone anymore. After that night, nothing about life suddenly became easier. Bills didn't disappear, shifts didn't magically shorten, the fridge didn't suddenly fill itself. But something shifted in the way they lived. The daughter began helping in quiet, unassuming ways, turning off lights, folding laundry without being asked, saving coins she had been spending on little treats, not because she was afraid, not because she felt pressured, but because she felt included, because she felt trusted. And the parent stopped pretending they were invincible. They still worked hard, still worried, still felt the familiar ache of exhaustion each evening, but they spoke about it now. They shared small worries with their daughter, teaching her that it's okay to not be okay sometimes, that asking for help isn't weakness, that honesty is a form of strength. Strength doesn't always look like bravery on the battlefield or success in front of an audience. Sometimes strength looks like showing up anyway, showing up tired, worried, uncertain, and still loving fully. Sometimes strength looks like letting someone see you struggle. The parent began noticing other small things, how comforting it was to hear the daughter's voice in the middle of the night, calling softly from her bedroom after a nightmare, because now she knew they weren't alone. How even a small hug at the kitchen table could feel like a reassurance that life would carry on, even if the world outside felt heavy. And viewers, this is important. Strength isn't always silent endurance. Real strength is connection, trust, and showing up for each other even when life is hard. Over time, the parent realized that pretending everything is fine had only made the burden heavier. Sharing it made life more manageable, more human, more real. And the daughter? She didn't need perfect answers. She needed presence. She needed honesty. She needed to know that someone she trusted was right there with her, no matter how heavy life got. From that night forward, the home felt different. Not perfect, not magically easy, but lighter, kinder, more connected. And that, my friends, is the kind of strength that lasts. Progress didn't come all at once. Life rarely works that way. One paid bill at a time, one calm evening at a time, one honest conversation at a time. Little victories that seemed small in the moment, but over days and weeks, they added up. The parent and the daughter began learning to navigate life together. No longer pretending that everything was perfect, they started to face challenges side by side. The long nights of worry didn't disappear, but they no longer felt unbearable, because now the burden was shared. Some evenings were still hard, exhaustion lingered, money still demanded attention, work never became easier, but those nights were different. The parent didn't sit alone at the kitchen table, carrying the weight silently. The daughter would notice, quietly asking, "Do you need help?" or simply sitting beside them until the tension eased. It was in these moments that the parent began to understand something essential. Life isn't about doing everything alone. It's about showing up, even when it's hard, and letting others show up with you. The home began to feel lighter, not because the world had changed, but because they had changed together. They learned to communicate better, to notice small signs of stress in each other, to speak up before the worry became overwhelming. And viewers, here's what I want you to remember. Shared burdens are lighter burdens. You don't have to carry everything alone, and asking for help is never a weakness. The parent also began to see changes in themselves. They laughed more, even when tired. They rested a little easier, knowing the daughter understood more than they'd ever realized. And in turn, the daughter grew more responsible, more observant, more compassionate. Together, they learned that life didn't have to be perfect to be lived fully. It didn't have to be free of struggle to be meaningful. And they learned that strength wasn't about hiding your hardships. It was about facing them honestly and facing them together. Step by step, day by day, the weight that once seemed insurmountable became manageable, not because life had changed entirely, but because they had found a way to change how they met it. And that, my friends, is a lesson worth remembering. That simple question, "Are we okay?" was never about money. It wasn't about homework or dinner or how many hours the parent had worked that week. It was about connection, about trust, about whether the honesty they had been hiding all this time still lived in the home. Children have a way of sensing things adults try to conceal. They notice the tension in voices, the stiffness in movements, the silent pauses that say more than words ever could. And this little question, quietly spoken across the kitchen table, carried more weight than any adult might imagine. The parent realized that pretending to be fine had done little to protect the child. It had only created distance, a quiet wall between them. But the question had dismantled that wall. With those 3 words, the daughter had opened a door to honesty, trust, and shared vulnerability. And what the parent discovered in that moment was something important. Children don't need perfection. They don't need adults to have everything under control. What they need is presence. What they need is honesty. What they need is to know that someone they trust is there with them, no matter how hard life gets. From that point on, the home felt different. There was still work to be done. There were still bills to pay and challenges to face, but the fear that had quietly grown in the parent's chest began to dissipate. They weren't carrying everything alone anymore. The daughter began to understand that strength doesn't mean hiding your struggles. She saw her parents' efforts, yes, but she also saw their humanity. And in seeing that, she grew too, more observant, more caring, more connected. And viewers, let me share this with you. Sometimes the simplest questions are the ones that reveal the deepest truths. Don't underestimate them. That one question changed everything, not because it solved the problems, but because it brought them into the light. It reminded the parent that vulnerability isn't weakness. It reminded them that honesty is the foundation of trust. And it reminded them that sharing life's burdens is what keeps families strong. So when you hear a question that feels small but lands deep, pay attention. It may just be the key to connection you didn't know you needed. I've watched families for many years, and I've learned something that people often forget. The families that survive the hardest seasons aren't the quietest. They aren't the ones who pretend everything is perfect. The families that endure are the ones that speak, that listen, that sit together, even when there are no perfect answers. They face life's challenges honestly, not because it makes things easier, but because it makes them stronger. That's exactly what happened in this story. The parent stopped pretending. The daughter was included in the truth, and together they found a rhythm, a way of living that allowed them to carry life's weight without breaking. They still had struggles, bills still piled up, exhaustion still pressed down on them, but they were shared now, and shared burdens, my friends, are lighter. From that experience, the parent learned a lesson they'll carry forever. You don't have to be perfect to be strong. You don't have to hide your worries to protect someone you love. Sometimes letting others in, even children, is the bravest thing you can do. And the daughter? She didn't just learn about honesty. She learned about empathy, resilience, and how strength comes in many forms. She learned that even adults have limits and that it's okay to ask for help. She learned that love isn't just shown in words, but in shared moments, shared struggles, and shared victories, no matter how small. And viewers, this is the part I want you to remember most. The most important strength in life is connection, honest connection, shared understanding, showing up for each other even when it's hard. So the next time someone you love asks a question that feels simple but lands deep, listen. Don't brush it off. Don't pretend. Let it guide you to honesty, understanding, and togetherness. Life will never be perfect, but it can be lived fully, with less weight on your shoulders and more warmth in your heart. This is what Grandma knows, that even in the heaviest seasons, families can find light if they face life together. So, if you're watching this tonight, if you're holding things together quietly, smiling through exhaustion, pretending everything is fine, let me say this gently. You don't have to carry it alone. You don't have to hide your struggles to protect the people you love. You don't have to be perfect to be strong. Life is heavy sometimes. Bills, work, exhaustion, worries, they pile up one on top of another. But shared weight is lighter. Honest conversations are stronger than silence, and letting someone in, even when it's hard, is a kind of bravery you can't measure. I want to hear from you. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Tell me if a question ever came into your life that changed everything. And if this story touched you, if it reminded you of something you felt but never said aloud, Like this video, subscribe to Grandma Story Studio, share it with someone who needs this tonight. Remember, love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's in the small moments, a question asked, a hand held, a burden shared. And sometimes that's all it takes to make life feel lighter. Thank you for sitting with me through this story. Life is never easy, but it is always better when we face it together.